the truth is that time is an illusion. You are not limited by time. And I know this for some of you, many of you, it may be like, Stacy, what are you talking about? Time is not an illusion. It is 24 hours. It is a measuring tool. It's time.
This is Becoming, the podcast for leaders to think differently with actionable tips in 30 minutes or less to claim your intuition, your influence, and your agency. And finally, get to the truth of what stands between you and who you are meant to become. Many of us believe that once we become that future self, then we will be happy, successful, and complete. This podcast exists to shine a light on the truth that the time is now and your future self can be who you become today.
Welcome back to another episode of Becoming. I'm your host, Stacy B, and today's episode is all about understanding what time really does to us, understanding how limiting it can be, and really removing the lie of time. So diving into today's episode is really around the lie of time and how time can be a huge limiter for us as leaders, that things are supposed to take a certain amount of time, or our beliefs or past experience has led us to believe that things take a certain amount of time, or when we get there, we will be ... So if we look at our lives as leaders, everything is very centralized around time, right? We're back-to-back appointments. We are, running a tight calendar. We use time to separate this from that. But if we really look at time for a moment, it's a tool, right? Just like money is a tool, time is a tool. And telling time was originally invented, created to help farmers with their crops. And I think that it is high time to ask ourselves how time is serving us or not serving us. And today's episode is really just an invitation to get you to start thinking about time differently so that it's not running you. It's not the governor. You are running it. You are mindful of the purpose it has in your life, but it's not something that runs you. And so when I talk about time, the first thing I want to invite you to see is that time is a measuring tool. And making time or creating time, it's running whether we're stopping or going, right? It's not something that we have control over. And so I think that's part of why we allow it to control us, is because we don't necessarily know how to work with it, right? And so it's just this measuring tool that we use. And so the first invitation I want to give to you is, what is your relationship with time? The invitation is to consider what that relationship is. What is your relationship with time? Do you feel controlled by it? Do you feel like it's running your life? Do you feel like you can't ever get everything done? What is your relationship to time? The next question that I have for you to consider is, what in my life am I postponing because of the time it's going to take? This question is where I want to do a deep dive with you, because a lot of us base our decisions off of time versus what we want. And this is a really pivotal moment, right? Piece of conversation, because if you are basing what you want off of time, maybe it takes longer than you're willing to invest. There is the reality of how long something takes. But in my experience, what I notice, both in my past, and it still creeps up on me, right, and with clients that I work with is that they don't just look at the reality of how long something takes. Most often, they're projecting what they think, or they're projecting how long they think something's going to take. They actually don't know that it's going to take as long as they're saying. They're just using time as an excuse. And in those situations, what happens is we hand over our power to time, and it's running us versus us using it for our highest and best good, for our use. And so that's really where with time, we have to start looking at it like the truth. It is an illusion. It's an illusion from the standpoint of your ability to create what you want. And that's really, if you could walk away with one thing from this episode today, is that the truth is that time is an illusion. You are not limited by time. And I know this for some of you, many of you, it may be like, Stacy, what are you talking about? Time is not an illusion. It is 24 hours. It is a measuring tool. It's time. And the distinction that I want you to make, I want to invite you to make is that as it relates to your ability to create the results in your life that you want, time is an absolute illusion. While time is this measuring tool, and it's been used for centuries to guide us, to plan, to predict, it also has been a huge source of how we're limited. It's helped us forget our ability and power in some ways of how effective we can be by when we focus on what we want. And when we stay focused on that and we don't necessarily allow time to be that limiter, that's when true creation and innovation and things can really be up-leveled into our lives and change. And so if you can start to play with this idea that time is an illusion, what that's going to open up in you is this side of creativity and ability to start looking at things for what they are without the projection of time. In other words, when we use time as that limitation, we make decisions from a place of time controlling our decisions versus us leading ourselves forward. And that's really, the root that I want to pull with you today is, what if time wasn't a part of the equation as you are dreaming, as you are thinking about whatever it is you want, as you're thinking about what it is you want to create? What if time wasn't a part of what you were considering, and you could just step into that embodiment of how you might feel and how you might feel once that thing was realized? Because you see, when we start to think about time, sometimes we can find ourselves settling or holding back or pulling back on what it is we actually want. And it's very important. I mean, you've heard a lot of personal development out there, like you have to set SMART goals, right? Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-based. Time-based. You need to put a deadline on it, right? You need to hold yourself accountable to that it's going to happen before this date. And while that's important, right, we have to measure these things. What can happen is that we start to be run by time, and it starts to erode our creativity and ability to really claim our power as the truth, which is we are creative beings, right? We are taking inspiration that's been given to us, that's been put on our hearts, and making it real into the world by our actions. A lot of times when time comes into play, we can start holding ourselves back or even not take action on something because we don't have time. We can't see, how much time it's going to take. And because we don't have that vision, or because we become limited in that contemplation process, the dream dies. The dream doesn't get launched. Our change doesn't get out into the world as quickly or as, effectively as we desire it to.
Are you interested in being a guest on our podcast? If so, we'd love the opportunity to speak further with you about your story and about sharing it with our audience. Click the link below in the show notes if you're interested in being a guest on our podcast, and one of the Truth Teachers team members will be in touch with you to take the next step.
And so if you can think about time as it's this illusion, and you instead put yourself in the driver's seat, right? The driver's seat of creating what you want in your life. And you remove the requirement of time. And I think an example of what I'm about to say is greatly demonstrated in a book called The Big Leap. So Gay Hendricks in that book talks about Einstein time. And he talks about, those mornings when you're just present and you are doing your makeup, or you're, with your kids, getting them ready, and you're just really present. You are able to fit most everything in, versus those days when you are rushing and you are, trying to make it all happen. You're stressed and you're not present. That's when that stress happens. That's when you feel like you run out of time. And so the takeaway on that is that, how do we expand with time, or how do we become one with time? It very much boils down to our ability to be present. It very much boils down to, am I present in this moment with what I'm doing? Am I present in this moment with what I want to create? And really seeing that time expands to the attention you give it, right? It's like, if you give yourself 3 hours, or a better example is you're going on vacation. I don't know if you've experienced this. I know this is true for me. Every time I go on vacation, I get so much more done before I leave than if I have the full week to fill up. And so it's this idea that time is truly an illusion if that can be our experience. And so if you think more about, am I present versus do I have enough time? If you think more about, am I present? And let's say you're not, and you can ask yourself, where am I really? If you feel stressed, ask yourself, am I thinking about the future? Am I thinking about a situation? Am I thinking about something outside of my present moment? That's a great way to shift yourself back into presence. But it's truly when we're not present that we give our power away to time, and it can run us, limit us, and not be used for what it's meant to be, right? It's a measuring tool, and we need to use it that way. But time runs our life. Time runs us, from if you think about the last time you got stressed. Like, when we get stressed, it's because we are concerned about not being able to maybe meet a deadline, deliver something on time. There's this level of stress that is created a lot of times when you feel like you're running out of time. But if you started to look at yourself as the truth, which is you are the source of all that is, and you said that time starts with you, right? And you said that your presence is the birthplace of time. What's going to happen is you connect more to your present moment. You connect more to what you're working on, what you're passionate about, what you're trying to drive forward. And from this place, then your creation, innovation, everything in between, it naturally unfolds, and funny enough, ends up getting completed because you're coming from this place of presence. And so I invite you to think about, how is time acting as a limitation in my life? How am I allowing time to dictate how I feel? How am I allowing time to get me off course and disconnect from being present? And if you can start to see trends, if you can start to see patterns of where you're getting caught up, you're going to be able to bring yourself back to the present moment, to being conscious, and to really starting to look at time as your ally, starting to look at time as a measuring tool, as a resource, one that by your presence alone can be a resource that isn't limited any longer and doesn't limit you on what you want to create or when you want to create it, or when you leave this position, then you'll create this business. So much of our restriction is based in time. And the invitation is to see your way through. It's to see your way out of it. And the way out is by returning home to yourself. It's by returning home to the present moment and seeing that you are the source of all that is. And if you start using that, a little tip I'll leave you with today is, as you're moving about your day, when you notice you're getting stressed, maybe you're stuck in traffic, maybe you're trying to get to that appointment, return to presence. I'll give you a quick example of what I mean. I was on my way to an appointment this morning, and the traffic light kept turning. It would turn green and then red, green and then red, to the point where I was sitting at the same traffic light about 5 minutes away from my destination for a good 10 minutes. And I noticed that stress was starting to bubble up in me. I was noticing that like angst of like, oh, I'm going to be late. And I reached to grab my phone and paused and just kind of coached myself. Okay, are you present? That's what I asked. Am I present? And my answer was no. And so I took a moment and I just got in my body, noticed I wasn't present. So naturally presence can return. And I look at my phone and I received a text from the client that said that she was running 5 minutes late. And so that's just a quick example of like, when you start to return to presence, everything else takes care of itself, right? There's no issue because I'm late. Like, everything is unfolding just how it's supposed to be. And that's the place where you can really return home to, is this place of presence. And if you start operating in the world from this place of presence, what happens is you just start to notice this flow. You just start to notice this collaboration with other people, with the universe, with events, with time, that it's stopping the narrative that time is running us, that we have to, urgently do all of these things, and instead return to our home, right? That internal home of presence first, and then merge with time, hold hands with time, link arms with time, right? It's this idea of this co-creation versus it running us. So as you go about your day, the question I'll leave you with is, am I present? And even if that answer is no, just the question alone will help you return home so that you can start moving through the world in presence, in alignment with time, in co-creation with time, instead of it being a limitation.
Are you experiencing change and breakthroughs as you listen to Becoming? If so, show us some love and hit the subscribe button, leave a review, and share an episode. I love bringing this content to you each week, and together, listener by listener, we can wake up the world. See you next week.